They tried to sell my lake. Not a lake they owned, not a lake they maintained, not even a lake they had legal access to. My lake, the one sitting behind my house that had been in my family longer than most of the people running that neighborhood association had even lived in the state. And the craziest part wasn't that they tried it. The craziest part was how confident they were that I would just sit there and let it happen. I live outside a little town called Briar Ridge, Kentucky. If you've ever driven through eastern Kentucky, you know the kind of place I'm talking about. Rolling hills, winding roads, old barns leaning a little farther every year, and enough trees to make you forget the rest of the world exists. My property sits at the end of a gravel road where nobody has any reason to visit unless they know me personally. 8 acres, mostly woods, nothing fancy, but every square foot of it means something to me, especially the lake. Technically, it's a pond, I guess, but nobody around here ever called it that. To me, it always felt bigger than a pond, bigger than water. My grandfather dug it back in 1958. At least that's what the old photographs say. I've got one picture of him standing beside a borrowed excavator, shirt soaked through with sweat, cigarette hanging from his mouth, looking proud enough to burst. Every time I see that photo, I remember the stories he used to tell me when I was a kid. The ground fought him every inch. The equipment broke twice. His friends told him he was wasting his time. So naturally he kept going. That's the kind of man he was. Stubborn enough to move dirt simply because somebody told him he couldn't. By the time I inherited the property, the lake had become part of the landscape. Spring-fed water, bass, bluegill, turtles sunning themselves on fallen logs, herons dropping in every now and then like they own the place. Most mornings started exactly the same way. Coffee first, then a slow walk down a narrow dirt path through the trees. I'd stand by the water for 5 minutes before doing anything else. Sometimes 10. No phone, no noise, just water and silence. I didn't realize how much that routine mattered until someone tried taking it away. The trouble started when development reached our side of the county. For years, the land next to mine sat empty. Then investors bought it, cleared sections of forest, built dozens of new homes, and before long, a homeowners association showed up right along with them. Now here's the important part. I was never part of that HOA, never signed anything, never agreed to any covenants, never paid dues. My property was completely separate. Different deed, different parcel, different ownership. Legally speaking, we were neighbors and nothing more. Unfortunately, some people have a hard time understanding the difference between seeing something and owning it. At first, it was small stuff. People wandering too close to my property line. Kids fishing where they weren't supposed to. Residents treating the woods behind their homes like an extension of their backyards. Nothing serious enough to start a fight over. Just annoying. Then one afternoon, I found something that changed everything. I was walking down toward the lake after a rainstorm when I spotted a bright orange survey flag sticking out of the ground near the shoreline. That alone got my attention. Nobody should have been surveying my property. I walked over and pulled back the little plastic tag attached to the wire. The words printed on it made me stop cold. Future Recreation Zone. Phase 3 expansion. I remember staring at it for several seconds, trying to make sense of what I was reading. Expansion? What expansion? On whose property? I yanked the flag out of the ground and tossed it into the weeds, but that uneasy feeling followed me all the way back to the house. That night, I barely slept. Something wasn't right. A week later, I found out exactly what it was. A community newsletter showed up in my mailbox. Normally, I threw those things away without reading them. This time I opened it. Halfway down the second page was an article about a major partnership between the HOA and a regional development company. Luxury rental cabins, walking trails, outdoor recreation spaces, higher property values, the usual sales pitch. Then I hit one sentence that made my stomach drop. The entire project would be centered around the scenic waterfront feature located on the eastern boundary of the community. The scenic waterfront feature. That was my lake, not theirs. Mine. And they wrote about it like ownership had already been settled, like I was some minor detail they could deal with later. That's when I stopped feeling confused and started getting angry. Because misunderstandings happen, mistakes happen, but this didn't feel like either one. This felt deliberate, and deep down I had a feeling I already knew exactly who was behind it. Her name was Evelyn Brooks, president of the HOA. Always smiling, always polished, always talking like she'd already made the decision before the meeting even started. The moment I saw her name attached to the announcement, I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let this stay in a newsletter. I was going to hear the explanation directly from her. And if she really thought she could sell something that belonged to me, then our next conversation was about to get very uncomfortable. Started with me showing up at the next HOA meeting without an invitation, without signing in, and without any intention of sitting quietly in the back pretending I didn't exist. It was held in a renovated community barn just off the main road, the kind of place that tries too hard to feel warm and local, but ends up feeling like a courtroom with better lighting. Folding chairs, a long table at the front, a projector humming softly like it was waiting to announce somebody's future plans. I saw her the moment I walked in. Evelyn Brooks. Perfect posture, clean blazer. That same calm expression like nothing in the world had ever surprised her. She glanced at me once, just briefly, and I could tell she recognized me from the property line disputes and the occasional letters I'd ignored. But she didn't react. Just that polite HOA smile, the kind that says we'll deal with this later. I took a seat anyway. Didn't ask. Didn't wait. Just sat there and watched. The meeting started like all HOA meetings start, slow and painfully ordinary. Landscaping budgets, mailbox regulations, complaints about speeding cars, all the small-town noise people use to feel like they're in control of something. I almost wondered if I had imagined the whole thing with my lake. Almost. Then Evelyn stood up. She tapped a pen against her notes once, looked around the room like she was introducing a new neighborhood feature instead of a multi-million-dollar development decision. "We are pleased to announce," she said, "that we have finalized a partnership with Greenstone Development Group to enhance the community experience." That word again. Enhance. Like something was broken and they were fixing it. She clicked the remote and a slide appeared on the screen behind her. Cottages. Walking trails. A pristine, rendered image of a lake I immediately recognized. My lake. They even brightened the water in the image, made it look more polished, more commercial, like nature needed their approval to be beautiful. And then she said it. The waterfront feature will serve as the centerpiece of the project. That was the moment I stood up. The chair scraped against the floor louder than I expected, cutting through the room like a gunshot in a quiet theater. Every head turned at once. Evelyn didn't flinch. Of course she didn't. But I saw it in her eyes. A slight pause. A recalculation. Like she was deciding how difficult I was about to become. "Which waterfront feature?" I asked. My voice wasn't raised. Didn't need to be. The room was already quiet enough. She tilted her head slightly, polite confusion. "The lake along the eastern boundary." I nodded slowly. "You mean the lake that sits entirely on my property?" That did it. The room shifted. You could feel it. Chairs adjusting. Eyes moving back and forth. People suddenly very interested in their hands. Evelyn closed her folder gently, like she was handling a minor inconvenience. "There appears to be some informal overlap in usage," she said. I almost laughed. Informal overlap. Like my deed was just a suggestion. "There's no overlap," I said. "There's a property line. There's a recorded deed. And there's a lake that has never belonged to your community." She kept her tone steady. "The board has reviewed available documentation." That word again. Reviewed. Not respected. Not verified. Reviewed. "And based on long-standing community use," she continued, "the area has been considered part of the shared natural environment." That was the moment something in me shifted. Because that wasn't confusion. That was strategy. They weren't mistaken. They were building a narrative. I stepped forward one pace, just enough that my voice didn't feel like it was coming from the back of the room anymore. "Considered by who?" I asked. No answer. Just silence. So I kept going. "Because I've got a deed. I've got surveys. I've got tax records. And none of them say anything about shared natural environment." Evelyn finally looked directly at me. Not angry. Not embarrassed. Controlled. That was worse. "This project is moving forward," she said. "It has already been approved in principle." I shook my head slowly. "That's the problem," I said. "You keep talking like approval replaces ownership." A few people in the room shifted again. Someone cleared their throat. Nobody spoke. Evelyn took a small breath, like she was shifting into negotiation mode. There are significant financial commitments involved, she said. Delays could impact multiple stakeholders. I looked at her for a second, really looked, and I realized something I didn't want to admit. She wasn't improvising. She believed she was right, or she believed she could make it right after the fact. Either way, she had already moved too far to back up easily. So I nodded once. Slow. All right, I said, and I sat back down. Not because I was done, because I wasn't. That night, I went through every document I had ever inherited from my grandfather. Old deed copies, survey maps drawn by hand, county permits that smelled like dust and ink. And buried inside all of it, I found something most people would have missed. A water management easement filed decades ago. Legal authority over controlled water level adjustments for maintenance purposes. Completely legitimate, completely enforceable, and very inconvenient for anyone planning a lakeside development that depended on a full water feature. I stared at that document longer than I cared to admit. Then I made a decision. If they wanted to treat my property like it was public scenery, then I would remind them exactly what control actually looked like. I didn't call Evelyn, didn't send an email, didn't argue. I rented a pump, industrial grade, louder than it had any right to be, and I drove it out to the lake just before sunset. When I set it down, the machine looked almost absurd against the stillness of the water, like violence sitting inside a quiet room. I stood there for a moment with my hand on the starter cord. And I'll be honest, I hesitated, not because I doubted I could do it, but because I understood exactly what it would mean once I did. There's a difference between defending something and changing it permanently. And I was about to cross that line. I pulled the cord. The engine roared to life, echoing through the trees. And just like that, the water started moving, leaving, slow at first, then steady, relentless, like the lake had suddenly remembered it didn't need permission to leave either. And I just stood there watching it happen, knowing that whatever came next was no longer going to be a conversation. By the third day, the lake didn't look like a lake anymore. It looked like something had been erased rather than drained, like nature itself was slowly admitting it had been misfiled on the map of somebody else's plans. The waterline kept retreating, inch by inch at first, then foot by foot, until the shoreline I grew up knowing was gone and replaced with wet clay and exposed roots that hadn't seen daylight in decades. People started noticing. At first, it was just cars slowing down near the edge of the property road, windows rolling down, heads turning. Then it became walking figures of the treeline, neighbors pretending they were just out for air while clearly staring at something they didn't understand but couldn't ignore. And I'll admit something I didn't expect. It felt quiet. Not peaceful quiet. The other kind. The kind that builds pressure. On the fourth day, someone finally knocked. His name was Daniel. Lived 2 houses over in the new development. One of those guys who always waves like he's trying to stay neutral in a war that hasn't reached him yet. He stood on my porch, hands in his pockets, eyes flicking toward the back of my property. You doing something with the lake? He asked carefully. Maintenance, I said. That was all I gave him. He nodded like he understood, even though he didn't. People are talking, he added. I leaned on the doorframe. People talk a lot, I said. Doesn't mean they read deeds. That ended the conversation faster than anything else could have. By the 5th day, the HOA wasn't quiet anymore. Evelyn showed up at my property in person. Not a meeting, not a letter, not a polite request. She came to my front gate like she was stepping into territory she had already mentally claimed. And I could tell immediately something had changed. The confidence was still there, but now it was layered with pressure. Real pressure. She didn't waste time. The water level is causing issues with the development timeline, she said. I looked past her toward the emptying basin behind the trees. You mean the lake? I said. She paused, a fraction of a second too long. Then, yes. I nodded slowly. The lake that belongs to me. Her jaw tightened slightly, but she recovered quickly. This doesn't need to escalate, she said. There are contractual obligations with the developer, and if those are impacted, liability becomes complicated. That word again. Liability. Not ownership. Not truth. Just risk management. I stepped off the porch, closing the distance just enough that she had to look up slightly to meet my eyes. You can't contract something you don't own, I said. She didn't respond right away. That silence told me more than anything she could have said, because now she wasn't arguing facts. She was trying to stabilize a situation that had already slipped out of control. After she left, I went back down to the lake. What was left of it? The pump was still running, steady and mechanical, like it didn't care about conversations or consequences. The surface had dropped so far that the middle basin was now a cracked bowl of earth, dark and uneven, like the land was remembering its original shape. And that's when the buyers arrived. I didn't expect them, but I knew why they came. 3 SUVs pulled up along the gravel road. Expensive, clean, too polished for a place that was currently falling apart in real time. A group of developers stepped out, suits and tablets, and that particular kind of smile people wear when they're about to turn nature into numbers. They walked toward the edge of what used to be water. And then they stopped, all at once, because there was no water to sell. Just land, just mud, just silence. One of them looked at me. "This is the site?" he asked. I nodded. "This is it." He looked down again, confused. "The lake is supposed to be the centerpiece." I gestured toward the pump. Was. That word landed hard. You could see it ripple through them instantly, not anger first, not confusion first. Calculations, lost projections, legal exposure. One of them stepped aside and made a phone call without saying a word to me. Within 20 minutes, they were gone. No inspection, no discussion, no deal. Just tires kicking up gravel as they left the same way they came. And for the first time in days, it was completely silent. 2 weeks later, everything collapsed officially. The project was pulled, contracts disputed, penalties triggered, lawyers got involved. And suddenly, the shared community feature they had built an entire financial model around turned into a liability nobody wanted to touch. Evelyn resigned not long after. No speech, no explanation, just a short notice in the next HOA update saying leadership had transitioned and the board was moving forward in a new direction. Like nothing had happened. Like everything hadn't just fallen apart in real time. A month later, the rains came back. Slow at first, then steady. And the land did what it had always done long before any of them showed up with plans and renderings and assumptions. It healed. The basin filled again. Water returned to the low points. The lake reformed itself like it had simply been waiting for permission to come back. But something had changed. Not the land. Not the water. Me. Because now when I walk down that path with my coffee in the morning, I don't just see trees and reflection and still water. I see how quickly people will redraw lines on a map if they think nobody is watching. And I see how fragile those lines really are when someone finally decides to enforce them. Sometimes I stand there longer than I used to, just watching the surface settle, thinking about how close it came to being turned into something I wouldn't recognize anymore. And I still ask myself if I went too far, or if I just went far enough to remind people where the boundary actually is. I don't know, maybe both. But I do know this. The lake is still mine, and nobody's trying to sell it anymore, at least not out loud. So I'll leave you with the same question I asked myself. If someone tried to take something like that from you, quietly, legally, confidently, what would you have done? Would you have fought it the same way? Or would you have found another path? I'm curious where you land on that. Because around here, people still talk about what happened, even if they don't agree on why it happened.